Once there was a woodcutter with 2 children and their stepmother. The boy's name was Hansel, and the girl's name was Gretel. They lived so poorly that sometimes there was not even anything to eat. And then one evening he lay in bed, pondering how to feed the children further. His wife advised him to have children in the forest, light a fire, give a piece of bread each and leave them there, not all 4 of them die of hunger. But the woodcutter did not agree. And until then, his wife persuaded him that he finally agreed. And the children, because of hunger, also could not sleep and heard everything that their stepmother said to their father. And when the parents fell asleep, Hansel secretly rushed out of the house. The moon was shining brightly, and the white stones glittered like coins. Hansel pocketed as many of them as he could fit. Then he returned home and the children went to bed.
Thank you.
In the morning, the stepmother came to the children, gave each of them a piece of bread, and they all went to the forest together. On the way, Hansel threw out white stones one by one. When they arrived at the clearing, my father began to light a fire. He ordered the children to sit near the fire and make sure that it didn't go out, while they and their stepmother would go for more firewood. They sat, tired, and fell fast asleep. When the children woke up, it was a dark night all around. And when a full month had risen in the sky, Hansel took his sister by the hand and went, looking for the way through the pebbles, which glittered like new coins, and showed them the way. They walked all night long, and at dawn they came to their father's house. Some time passed. And the children again heard how the stepmother one night began to beg their father to get rid of the children. He refused, but his wife did not want to listen to him. She cursed and expressed all sorts of reproaches to him. When the parents fell asleep, Hansel, like the last time, wanted to collect stones, but the stepmother locked the door and the boy could not leave the house.
Thank you.
Early in the morning, the children were given a piece of bread each, even less than the previous time. On the way to the forest, Hansel shredded his piece in his pocket and threw the crumbs on the ground. The stepmother took them even further into the forest. Again a big fire was lit, and the father ordered the children to watch the fire while they and their stepmother chopped some more wood. When lunchtime came, Gretel shared her piece of bread with Hansel. And they fell asleep. We woke up when the dark night fell. And then a month came up, and they got together on their way, but they could not find a single crumbs, because thousands of birds fluttering in the forest had long been eating those crumbs. So the children walked for a very long time, but they could not get out of the forest. Suddenly, the road led them to the hut. Coming closer, the children saw that the house was all built of bread and biscuits, and the windows were made of pure sugar. Hansel reached up and broke off a piece of the roof, while Gretel went to the window and began gnawing at its windows. And then the door in the hut opened wide, and the old woman came out, leaning on a crutch. Hansel and Gretel were so scared that they even dropped their tidbits from their hands. And the old woman was kind and invited them to her hut. There was already abundant food on the table: milk, cookies, apples, and nuts. After dinner, the old woman made 2 clean beds for the children, and Hansel and her sister thought they were in heaven. But the old woman only pretended to be affectionate, but in fact she was an evil witch, who built her bread hut for this purpose in order to lure children. Early in the morning, while the children were sleeping, she took Hansel and put him in a small cage. And she ordered her sister to do everything that the wicked witch demanded of her. The old woman decided to fatten the boy in order to eat him later. So Gretel began to cook the most delicious food for Hansel, and she herself got nothing but leftovers. Some time passed, and the boy did not get fat. Then the old woman did not want to wait any longer, and decided to cook and eat Hansel. She ordered Gretel to light the stove and apply water. When the stove warmed up, the old woman ordered her to climb into the stove and see if it was hot enough. So she wanted to push the girl into the fire and bake her. But Gretel knew what was on her mind. She said that she did not know how to get in there, and asked the witch to show herself. The old woman got angry and climbed into the oven. Then Gretel pushed her and slammed the shutter behind the witch. Wow, how terribly the old woman howled then. Gretel, meanwhile, rushed to Hansel and opened the cage. Having freed their brother, they went to the witch's room, in which there were boxes of pearls and precious stones in all corners, filled their pockets with them, and went home. For several days the children were looking for their way back. The forest seemed more and more familiar, and at last they saw their father's house in the distance. How glad he was to see his children alive. Hansel and Gretel poured on the floor all the pearls and gems they had taken from the witch. There was no need to think about food. And they began to live, and rejoice. And the father drove the evil stepmother out of the house. Once upon a time, there lived a poor widow, and she had a son, Jack, and a cow, Belyanka. The cow gave milk every morning, and the mother and son sold it in the bazaar, and that was how they lived. But once Belyanka did not give milk, and they did not have food. Mom decided to sell the cow and open a shop with the proceeds. Jack took the rein in his hands and led the cow to the market. No sooner had he arrived than he met some wonderful old man. He said he would like to trade Jack's cow for beans. And with these words, he took out a handful of some strange beans from his pocket. The old man said these beans are magical. They need to be planted in the evening, and by morning they will grow to the very sky. Jack became very interested and agreed. The boy came home early. Mother was very angry that he gave the dairy cow in the whole neighborhood for a handful of some nasty beans. But Jack remembered the old man's words and decided that there was nothing to do, and planted beans in the yard. He went up to his attic sad, and fell asleep. In the morning, Jack woke up and saw something like a large tree in the yard. And this, it turns out, his beans sprouted, and the huge stem continued to grow upward until it grew to the sky. Jack jumped onto the stem and climbed up like a ladder. He climbed and climbed and climbed and climbed until, at last, he reached the sky. There he saw a long and wide road that led him to a huge castle. Jack went to his gate and knocked. The gate opened, and a tall woman stood on the threshold. Stuttering with fear, the boy asked for something for breakfast. The giantess let him in, but warned him not to catch the eye of her husband, because he is a cannibal. She took Jack to the kitchen. But before he had time to eat even half of his breakfast, suddenly the whole house shook from someone's steps. The boy was not taken aback and instantly jumped into the furnace. And at that very moment, the cannibal entered the room. Well, he was as big as a mountain. The cannibal took out 2 bags of gold from a huge chest and sat down to count the coins. He counted and counted, finally began to nod off, and began to snore. Then Jack quietly climbed out of the oven, crept past the cannibal, grabbed 1 bag of gold, and rushed to the beanstalk. He threw the bag down, and he began to go down the stem lower and lower, until, finally, he found himself at his house. Jack told his mother everything that had happened to him, and handed her a bag of gold. They began to live on the money that was in the bag. But eventually the sack was empty and Jack decided to try his luck one more time at the top of the beanstalk. One fine morning, he got up early and climbed a beanstalk. The man-eater's wife stood at the threshold of the huge castle. She said that she would not let him in, because the last time her husband had lost a bag of gold. But all the same, she took pity on the poor boy, and let him into the castle. Suddenly the footsteps of a giant were heard, and Jack again hid in the furnace. The cannibal entered and told his wife to bring the hen that lays the golden eggs. The giantess brought it, and the ogre ordered the chicken to lay, and she laid the golden egg. The pleased giant began nodding and snoring. Then Jack climbed out of the oven, grabbed the golden chicken and rushed to the beanstalk. The boy returned home. He showed his mother a wonderful chicken, and they began to live selling golden eggs. But soon it seemed to Jack that this was not enough. and he again decided to try his luck at the top of the beanstalk. This time the boy climbed into the castle through the window. He jumped into a copper cauldron and hid. The cannibal and his wife entered the room. The giant smelled the boy, and they rushed to look for him in the oven. But he was not there. They searched every nook and cranny, but they didn't think to look into the copper cauldron. Desperate to search, the ogre ordered his wife to bring a golden harp and put it on the table. Under her beautiful sounds, the cannibal snored. Then Jack quietly climbed out of the cauldron, grabbed the golden harp and rushed to the door. But the harp played loudly and woke the cannibal. Jack ran at breakneck speed, leaping onto a beanstalk, and the giant in pursuit. Jack went down to his house and yelled at his mother to carry the axe. The mother ran out with an axe in her hands. The boy grabbed the axe and began to chop the beanstalk. The ogre felt the stem swing violently and stopped. Then Jack struck again with an axe and cut the beanstalk. It swayed and collapsed, and the ogre fell to the ground and crashed. From that day on, Jack and his mother never knew poverty again. But the boy was very sorry that, because of their greed, they almost paid with their lives. He promised that he would never steal again, and would work hard for the good of the family.